Now, before we do any more modeling, we need to clean up our, our house a little bit. Let's get our house in order. So over here in the items list, we're just seeing a bunch of effectively layers. These are just, we're using them just as layers for controlling, organizing our mesh data. But eventually, we're going to need to use these for more than that. These are going to need to be items that we can rig and animate and stuff like that. And things are going to get complicated really quickly once we start doing that. So to clean this up somewhat, we're going to use something called a locator. Let's move this stuff up out of the way. And I'm going to select all of these mesh items and instances and such, and hit Control G on the keyboard for group. That's going to put all this stuff into a group locator. Now, a group locator is one of 3 types of locator items here in Modo. Now, locator is just Modo's kind of Modo-specific word for what in other programs might be called a node or a null item. If you've heard of those, that's what that's what this is. It's just a position in space. That's all a locator is, really, with some properties assigned to it. So here we have a group locator. Group locators are one type of locator. If I say add item, we also have locator items. That's a different type of locator item. You'll notice it looks a little bit different here in the tree. It actually looks different out in the viewport as well, and it has a very different set of functionalities and advantages. We'll get to those over time. And if we go to Add Item, Locators, here's the third type, which is a texture locator. And this has yet another icon. It's very small, but it's actually a Mona Lisa next to a locator icon. And it's for positioning your graphics that you bring in while you're doing your texturing. Don't worry about that for now. My point is we have these 3 different types of locators that we can use to position things and organize things in space. Now, when we're organizing our geometry in the items list, we're going to use these ones called group locators. Group locators are meant primarily for use as organizational tools. We use them to organize our meshes, and also they work very well with the shader tree. So we can use them to filter out things like alpha masks and materials and all kinds of stuff. But what they don't do well is rigging. So what I want you to get out of your head right now is the idea that you're going to use these group locators to actually move and rotate and animate your geometry in space. Yes, you can do it, but it's not made for that, and there are some serious pitfalls associated with that workflow. So what we'll do is call this our car gloc. Gloc is just my little shorthand to tell me later on what type of item this is, if it's in a list or something where I don't have the icon next to it. You don't have to do that, but I find it useful. So I'm going to select these guys, Control G. We'll call this our wheels gloc. Select the seats. We'll do the same thing. Group those. Seats gloc. And finally, let's take the body. Let's take this bashing stuff with the body. And instead of Control G, I'll show you an alternate method. You can right click and go down to Parent to Group Locator. That does the same thing. And we'll call this our body gloc. And then these guys are just for working. So I'm going to rename those working gloc. So we don't have to deal with those if we don't want to. Also, we have these backdrop items. I put those into a group locator as well. I did that earlier without showing you. Sorry about that. But that's all that is. So now I can hide and show all of those at once in one click rather than having to do all 3. Ain't that nice? And then we'll take this other locator. And now you might be thinking, well, I could take that locator. Let's put it down below the car where we want our rig to be, let's say. And then I might take this car group locator and put it inside that locator. And I can take that and move it around, and it moves, and the car moves, and everybody's happy, right? That should be a good way to go. Actually, not so much. We are going to get into this in detail in the next few videos once we get into rigging. But suffice it to say, for now, that when we do rigging, we're going to do it a little bit differently. We're going to keep our meshes in one folder over here to one side. We're going to have our rig over here separately in a separate hierarchy, and then we're going to connect those two together manually. That way, our rig is always separate, or abstracted, as Rich Hurry would say, from our geometry. It's not absolutely necessary in all cases, but it's definitely a good best practice. So let me delete this locator to start with. We don't need it. All we were doing is cleaning up for now, and that should be just fine for us. Now, make sure to clean everything up, get everything where you want it to be, and then in the next video we'll actually finalize a few things before we jump into doing some rigging.